Hello, friends, and thank you for giving part of your day to go through Luke chapter 6 with me. Our chapter opens on the heels of Jesus' teaching in the last chapter on the problem with old wineskins, which is they can't hold new wine. Now, in these opening verses, we're going to see a perfect illustration of this. The first two verses, now it happened that he was passing through some grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were picking the heads of grain and rubbing them in their hands and eating the grain. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why do you do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Now, this prohibition against what the disciples did is not found in the Old Testament law, but rather in the rabbis' traditions. You see, the rabbis had excessively burdened the Jews with difficult extensions and add-ons to the simple life-giving laws that God has given us. The wineskins that couldn't hold the new wine wasn't the laws of the Old Testament, but rather the rabbi's system of legalistic interpretations and extensions of those laws. Now, Jesus illustrates the difference between God's intention for his laws and the rigid legalism of the Pharisees by telling the story of David eating the priest's bread when he was hungry. Now, the same corruption of Sabbath law by the Pharisees is again shown by their opposition to Jesus' healing on the Sabbath in the next 5 verses. You know, Jesus would later say that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was never intended to keep people from things like needed nourishment and healing. Rather, it was a gift from God to enhance our existence and especially our relationship to God. Remember, God promised to bless and multiply the fruit of our labor over the other 6 days so that we would have a day to untangle from the pressures of life and devote ourselves to enjoying God and his gifts, and also to grow in our knowledge of God and service to him. You know, in the same way, participation in church is a life-giving gift and should never be viewed as a burden. Now, Jesus said in verse 5 of this chapter that he is Lord of the Sabbath. So his followers were free to change the day of rest from Saturday to Sunday to commemorate Jesus' resurrection and to remind us that our rest flows out of the resurrection life that Jesus has given us. Now, beginning with verse 12, Jesus selects his 12 apostles. Now, this calling of the apostles is foreshadowed in the verse right before, where we read that the Jews were plotting against Jesus. And so Jesus must begin to make preparations for his mission to continue after he is taken away from the disciples. From this point, the intense training of these 12 men will be a priority. Now, the word apostle means sent one, and Jesus will begin to send them out in chapter 9. Now, beyond this inner circle of 12, we find another circle of 70 that Jesus sends out in chapter 10. My friends, what a blessing to be among those who are especially trusted by Jesus and to whom he can entrust his ministry. One more note, and that is that the number 12 is significant. National Israel is made up of 12 tribes, the descendants of 12 brothers. Now, the 12 apostles represent the new Israel, which is made up of people of all nations. And then again, beginning with verse 17 and running all the way to the end of the chapter, we have what is often called the Sermon on the Plain. And although this sermon has much in common with the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 through 7, both sermons also have much that is unique to themselves. And given that one is specifically said to have taken place on a mountain, and ours is said to take place on a, quote, level place, we should see them as 2 different sermons. Now, it's to be expected that Jesus would repeat himself on different occasions to different audiences. But even more importantly, it was necessary that Jesus' disciples hear the same teaching multiple times, since people learn by repetition. Remember, people did not have much access to scrolls or written documents, and so most learning was oral. And Jesus' teaching was stylized in pithy little statements, which would be easy to remember. Now, the first 4 verses of the sermon are beatitudes or pronouncement of blessings upon the poor, the hungry, and the ostracized. In Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, the spiritual dimension of these attributes are highlighted, such as when he speaks of the poor in spirit, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and those who are ostracized and persecuted for Jesus' sake. Now, Jesus next contrasts those who are blessed with those who face woe in the next 3 verses. And the main difference between these groups is that the second group seek for their reward in this life. They fit in and they're satisfied with the perverse values of this world. But those who are blessed do not embrace the values and systems of a sinful world and are therefore, we're ostracized and even sometimes persecuted. In the rest of the sermon, Jesus teaches the counterculture values and practices of those who follow Jesus. How many know we live different? Jesus points out that the motive for the Christian life is love, and not just love for the worthy or those who love us, but love for all, even our enemies and those who mistreat us. Our actions toward them must never be from hatred or ill will, but always out of love. Now, this may at times require trying to correct them or even opposing them, as Jesus sometimes did, but always with sincerity and kindness, truly having their best interest at heart. And we are never to act out of revenge. Now, in verse 31, Jesus sums it all up by giving us what's known as the golden rule. And I'll read verse 31. Treat others the same way you want them to treat you. How short and simple. This is called the golden rule because it is a guide, literally, for every circumstance you'll come across in life. And next in verse 37, Jesus instructs us about the tendency to be judgmental. Verse 37, do not judge and you will not be judged. And do not condemn and you will not be condemned. Pardon and you will be pardoned. Now, while we're to judge between good and evil and right and wrong, we are never to put ourselves in God's place as judges over our fellow man. For only God knows and understands every person in all their circumstances and conditions. We are instead to seek to be charitable and understanding, and we should extend mercy and forgiveness towards others just as we want it extended to us. Now, if we will live as disciples of Jesus and follow his teachings, here in this sermon, he promises us 3 great rewards. In verse 35, he says that we will be like our Father in heaven and will be sons of the Most High. Second, in verse 40, he says that we will become like Jesus, our teacher. Now, is there any greater reward than these? Is there any greater reward that we could desire? Now, the third reward is in verse 38, where Jesus says that every good blessing will be poured out and overflowing into our laps. But there is a warning at the end of the chapter in verse 46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Now, to call Jesus Lord is an act of worship, but to fail to obey him is to deny him as Lord. My friends, Jesus does not want us to live in deception, using empty words and offering false worship. And he goes on a little later to say that we must follow his teachings, or else the life we are building is not truly Christian, and it will not stand against the tests of life or the judgment of God. It will be like a house that collapses. True happiness and security are only found in wholehearted obedience to Jesus. Now, may we live in these truths so that each of us may live the life Jesus wants us to have.